Murray Rothbard. Wendy McElroy claims that Rothbard created the modern libertarian movement, inasmuch as modern libertarianism is an identifiable structure of interconnected beliefs, and Rothbard was the first theorist to make those connections complete. In her view, Rothbard was a system builder who put together, in a unique fashion, elements that did not necessarily originate with him. The elements which she believes Rothbard integrated into a coherent whole include a basic Aristotelian or Randian approach, the radical civil libertarianism of 19th century individualist anarchists, especially Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker, the free market philosophy of Austrian economists, in particular Ludwig von Mises, into which he incorporated sweeping economic histories, and the foreign policy of the American old right, that is, isolationism. Joseph Stromberg concurs with McElroy's claim, making the point that while others had contributed various bits and pieces to the libertarian project, Rothbard attempted a grand synthesis of all that was worth preserving and carrying forward. Before Rothbard, there had been classical liberals, teetering on the edge of anarchism. There had been free market anarchists. There had been Austrian school economists. There had been upholders of natural law and natural rights. There had been isolationists, revisionist historians, and proponents of a critical sociology of the state. Murray Rothbard's goal was a grand synthesis of all these forms of knowledge. The result was a powerful vehicle of political understanding and the intellectual weaponry with which to begin the process of fundamental change. From a European perspective, there is something quintessentially American about Rothbard, in the way he spoke, the way he wrote, in the issues he chose to focus on. David de Leon, writing on the theme of anarchism in America, notes that while the 19th century American anarchist Lysander Spooner and others explicitly influenced Rothbard, the social context of the United States was such that most anarchists were the automatic product of the American environment. Of his American anarchist predecessors, Rothbard wrote, "Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker were unsurpassed as political philosophers, and nothing is more needed today than a revival and development of the largely forgotten legacy they left to political philosophy." Spooner and Tucker adumbrated the way in which all individuals could abandon the state and cooperate to their own vast mutual benefit in a society of free and voluntary exchanges and interrelations. For Rothbard, the libertarian creed rests upon one central axiom, that no man or group of men may aggress against the person or property of anyone else, aggression being defined as the initiation of the use or threat of physical violence against the person or property of anyone else. It is important to note that this is not a pacifist charter. What's ruled out by the non-aggression axiom is the initiation of violence or the threat of violence against another's person or property. It does not rule out the use of violence in the defense of one's person or property. One may, of course, decline to defend one's person or property by force, but if so, that is one's own choice. Although particular individuals have aggressed and still do aggress against other persons and property, Rothbard believes that throughout history there has been one central, dominant and overriding aggressor upon all of these rights, the state. What is special and significant about Rothbard's treatment of the state and its agents is that he insists that the consistent libertarian should hold it accountable to the same moral norms as every other individual. The libertarian refuses to give the state the moral sanction to commit actions that almost everyone agrees would be immoral, illegal, and criminal if committed by any person or group in society. Once it is conceded that the state and its agents must be subject to the same moral law as everyone else, many political problems simply disappear. Murder is murder, whether committed by an individual or by the state through its agents. Theft is theft, whether committed by an individual or by the state through its agents. The transparently obscurantist device of calling these ethical violations by other names succeeds only so long as people are willing to believe that taxation is not really theft, and wars of aggression do not really involve murder. It is testimony to the power of long usage and propaganda that so many people do so believe. The nature of man is such that each individual person must, in order to act, choose his own ends and employ his own means to attain them. Possessing no automatic instincts, each man must learn about himself and the world, use his mind to select values, learn about cause and effect, and act purposefully to maintain himself and advance his life. Since men can think, feel, evaluate, and act only as individuals, it becomes vitally necessary for each man's survival and prosperity that he be free to learn, choose, develop his faculties, and act upon his knowledge and values. This is the necessary path of human nature. To interfere with and cripple this process by using violence goes profoundly against what is necessary by man's nature for his life and prosperity. Violent interference with a man's learning and choices is therefore profoundly anti-human. It violates the natural law of man's needs. So writes Rothbard. In his book, The Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard provides a fuller account of the concept of natural law than he presents in For a New Liberty. In contradistinction to his mentor, Ludwig von Mises, Rothbard holds that not only means but also ends are amenable to rational evaluation. In natural law philosophy, then, reason is not bound to be a mere slave to the passions, confined to cranking out the discovery of the means to arbitrarily chosen ends. For the ends themselves are selected by the use of reason. Natural law allows Rothbard to go beyond the limitations of praxeology. Natural law provides man with a science of happiness, with the paths which will lead to his real happiness. The skeptic might raise the question about why any particular end, such as life or the quality of life, has to be the object of human choice. Rothbard addresses this objection in The Ethics of Liberty, using an argument not unlike that which would be later used by Hans Hermann Hoppe in his Argumentation Ethics. Rothbard writes, "A proposition rises to the status of an axiom when he who denies it may be shown to be using it in the very course of the supposed refutation. Now, any person participating in any sort of discussion, including one on values, is, by virtue of so participating, alive and affirming life. For if he were really opposed to life, he would have no business in such a discussion. Indeed, he would have no business continuing to be alive. Hence, the supposed opponent of life is really affirming it in the very process of his discussion, and hence the preservation and furtherance of one's life takes on the stature of an incontestable axiom." One further very important task which natural law allows Rothbard to perform is to distinguish very clearly between the law, which is discoverable by the use of reason, on the one hand, and either custom or the arbitrary will of legislators on the other. One might be tempted to think that a natural law approach is necessarily conservative in its orientation, but nothing could be further from the truth. Customs, habits, traditions, and statutes, all these are brought to the bar of reason to be judged, and if found wanting, to be rejected. The fact that natural law theorists derive from the very nature of man a fixed structure of law independent of time and place, or of habit or authority or group norms, makes that law a mighty force for radical change, writes Rothbard. Finally, it is important to be clear that it is not Rothbard's intention in either For a New Liberty or The Ethics of Liberty to provide a complete or comprehensive ethical system. He intends only to set out the essence of a political philosophy of liberty based on a very sharply focused concept of justice. That a man should be free to perform Act X, and that no one may justly prevent him by force from so doing, does not settle the question of whether, within the scope of a larger and more comprehensive ethics, it is right for him so to do. Followers of classical eudaimonistic ethics who accept the traditional idea that the virtues are co-implicative might worry that Rothbard's notion of justice, being so sharply separated from the other virtues, cannot be fully rounded. To this, the response must be that while the concept of justice deployed by Rothbard is not fully rounded, it is not intended to be fully rounded, merely basic. However, it is in no way antagonistic to or subversive of a complete ethical system. Rather, it is fully compatible with any complete ethical system whose principles or applications do not violate the essence of liberty. The tension between liberty and power is the dynamic upon which almost all of Rothbard's work turns. The market, the network of free, uncoerced exchanges, is the locus of liberty. The primary locus of power is the state. His book Power and Market, which was published in 1970, was originally intended by Rothbard to form part of Man, Economy and State. Indeed, Chapter 12 of Man, Economy and State is a truncated form of Power and Market. Here I want to focus on those parts of Power and Market that could be seen as providing a bridge between the purely economic aspect of Rothbard's thought and the more specifically political. David Gordon is right to stress that Power and Market does not contain Rothbard's ethical system. It is a work of praxeology and is thus value-free. Nonetheless, the topics that Rothbard broaches here are germane to the system of political ethics he developed in his later works. In Power and Market, Rothbard applies the results of his economic work primarily, though not exclusively, to the realm of power, namely the state, examining particularly its modes of intervention in the market. Rothbard provides a typology of intervention which, as far as I can tell, is both original and novel. Intervention being the violent intrusion by an agent into free social or market relations. Intervention can be autistic, binary, or triangular. In autistic intervention, the intervener, I, either interferes with a person of S, an individual subject, or commands S to perform or to refrain from performing action A, where that action or interference bears on S's person or property alone. In binary intervention, the intervener I forces S to exchange with I, or elicits a quote-unquote gift from S. In triangular intervention, the intervener I compels or prohibits exchanges between pairs of subjects S1 and S2. All three forms of intervention are hegemonic, that is to say, they belong in the arena of command and obedience, in contrast to the voluntary contractual relationships characteristic of the market. Human relations can be one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, or many-to-many. Following the principle of methodological individualism, the second, third, and fourth cases ultimately reduce to the first. The market, however complex it may be, is analytically reducible to a complex of two-party exchanges. Human relations are either hegemonic, vertical, based upon command and obedience, or free, horizontal, and based upon agreement or contract. Where the relationship is hegemonic, as we have seen, there are only three basic possibilities. Rothbard instances murder and assault as examples of autistic intervention. These would be examples of S's having to suffer radical interference with his person. Other instances of interference with S's action would include forcing him to speak or not to speak, to observe a particular religious practice, or to refrain from so doing. Instances of binary intervention are not hard to come by: taxes, conscription, compulsory jury service, and, Rothbard adds provocatively, highway robbery. Price controls, minimum wage laws, conservation laws, patents, antitrust laws, licenses, and tariffs are all examples of triangular intervention. Those on the left side of the political spectrum tend to object to autistic intervention and are libertarian in this area, while usually being in favour of triangular intervention. Those on the right side of the political spectrum, in contrast, tend to object to triangular intervention and so are libertarian in this dimension, while being neutral or actively supporting autistic intervention, particularly in regard to the enforcement of public morals. Both sides take binary intervention to be basically unproblematic. The consistent libertarian, however, objects to all three kinds of intervention. The final chapter of Power and Market provides a tabular representation of the implications of holding either to a market principle or to a hegemonic principle in one's political society, which I present here in a slightly adapted form. Given one's ownership of oneself and one's ownership of those things that one has properly appropriated, there may well be times when another person will attempt to interfere with one's use of one's property. The world is not now, nor has it ever been, and never will it be, a utopia, and there will always be those who prefer to live parasitically and criminally upon the efforts of others. To the extent that such people succeed in their efforts, to that extent is one's liberty abridged. For really impressive interference with liberty, however, we must go not to your average criminal, but to an institution that takes aggression to a whole new level. Libertarians, writes Rothbard, regard the state as the supreme, the eternal, the best organized aggressor against the persons and property of the mass of the public. All states, everywhere. Rothbard's definition of the state is twofold. The state is that organization that 1. Acquires its revenue by physical coercion, and 2. Achieves compulsory monopoly of force and ultimate decision-making power over a given territorial area. In both these aspects, the state interferes with the property and liberty of the individual. Through taxation, the state aggresses against the property of the individual, and through the variety of compulsory monopolies it enjoys, the state aggresses against the free exchange of goods and services in the area of which it claims control. If then taxation is compulsory and is therefore indistinguishable from theft, it follows that the state, which subsists upon taxation, is a vast criminal organization, far more formidable and successful than any private mafia in history. Furthermore, writes Rothbard, it should be considered criminal not only according to the theory of crime and property rights as set forth in this book, but even according to the common apprehension of mankind, which always considers theft to be a crime. Human beings organize themselves in multifarious ways, either for their mutual betterment or for the criminal exploitation by one group of another. The state, on one level, is just another organization. The state differs from all none other criminal organizations, however, inasmuch as it receives its income by coercion and violence, or the threat of coercion or violence. The state employs coercion and violence not only to generate its income, but also takes it upon itself to interfere, often radically, in the lives of what it is pleased to regard with proprietorial pride its citizens. The state is also the quintessential monopoly, and the services it provides, such as they are provided badly and expensively. The monopoly power of the modern state extends widely over police and military services, the provision of law, judicial decision-making, the mint, and the power to create money, unused land, streets and highways, rivers and coastal waters, and the means of delivering mail. Some attempt to justify the state by claiming that the state is us, or, somewhat less radically, that the state represents us. And so what may appear to be an interference with liberty is just simply an appearance. Manifestly, the state is not us. The common experience of oppression testifies to this. Nor, somewhat less obviously, can it be said to represent us in any significant sense. The conflation of state and society is a fruitful source of confusion. Of course, human beings are not isolated individuals. Of course, we live in and can only flourish in society, where society denotes the sum of the complex overlapping system of voluntary and status relationships between individuals. But it is a gross mistake to conclude from this that because we need society, that therefore we need the state. The great non sequitur, writes Rothbard, committed by defenders of the state, including classical, Aristotelian and Thomistic philosophers, is to leap from the necessity of society to the necessity of the state. Not only is the state not equivalent to society, it is not properly even part of society unless we are prepared to recognize criminal gangs as part of society as well. The state, says Rothbard, is an inherently illegitimate institution of organized aggression, of organized and regularized crime against the persons and property of its subjects. Rather than necessary to society, it is a profoundly antisocial institution which lives parasitically off the productive activities of its subjects. There may be those who think that Wendy McElroy overstated her case in claiming that Rothbard created the modern libertarian movement. Looking at the evidence objectively, however, one has to admit that even though many of the ingredients of contemporary libertarianism were originated and developed by his predecessors, the anarchism of Benjamin Tucker and Lysander Spooner, the economics of Ludwig von Mises and other Austrians, the anti-war sentiments of the old right, Rothbard brought all these elements together in a new and potent theoretical and practical synthesis, which, powered by his rhetorical and dialectical skills, created a new platform on which subsequent defenders of liberty could stand. Summary. For Rothbard, the libertarian creed rests upon one central axiom: that no man or group of men may aggress against the person or property of anyone else. Throughout history, there has been one central, dominant and overriding aggressor upon all of these rights: the state. The tension between liberty and power is the dynamic upon which almost all of Rothbard's work turns. The market, the network of free, uncoerced exchanges, is the locus of liberty. The primary locus of power is the state. Rothbard's definition of the state is that organization that acquires its revenue by physical coercion and achieves compulsory monopoly of force and ultimate decision-making power over a given territorial area.